this on all the way through. I've never been crowned before. Thank you for involving me in Women's History Month. As many of you know, women's studies has been something that I acquired as a discipline when I came here, and I've always been proud of that. Now I'm going to speak a little louder because I hate being in an audience and not being able to hear. So I'm going to start just picking it up a little bit so that everyone can hear. I want to preface this discussion by saying that without a pandemic, I very likely would never have been in the office I'm in now. You may disagree. It was a difficult time. Our former president's health suddenly worsened. My retirement was announced, and along comes the pandemic. I don't know how else to put it. So let me say they were extraordinary times when I came to the presidency, and that's an understatement. So when Randy called about this opportunity, or perhaps we talked over lunch, I can't remember now, it was over lunch. Okay, we talked about this opportunity and graciously suggested that I speak. I thought, the road to the president's office, that has a nice sound. Later I decided it was brilliant because for me, the word road has a wonderful double meaning. Of course it means the literal physical passage in space, but it also means the whole arc of that journey, a larger metaphor for a passage. Road also suggested to me something more, a pilgrimage. I know many of you know, since you've studied medieval history, that in the Middle Ages, even earlier in the 9th century, for some very famous pilgrimages, these were not simply trips to a famous shrine or a tomb or a destination. The road was part of the experience. So the way of St. James, for example, Santiago de Compostela, that was the entire road, not just the shrine of St. James at the end. The journey from London to the shrine of Canterbury, the site of the death of Thomas Becket. It was the whole journey as memorialized in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which I'm sure you've all read and enjoyed. Or not. But to go on pilgrimage then as now was to step out of oneself to encounter something greater. And of course for that period to encounter God in a place where His grace had shone with particular splendor and power through men and women of faith. And I think pilgrimages still show that. Now we're a state institution, of course, but I still see a very spiritual element to the very secular road of this road to the presidency. So today, what is your Compostela? Where is your Via Francigena? That's your road through France. And how do you know when you're on that road, your road? Well, the pilgrims knew this very well. There were signposts and markers like the seashells to Compostela that the pilgrims wore as badges and were marked all along the route. Some of them still there, pressed into sides of walls, so that the pilgrims knew that they were on the right road. But for me, the reality of pilgrimage is best captured by one of the pilgrims in 12th century. His name was Benoit Lebray, which you don't have to remember, there's no test, but he actually wrote, "There is no way, the way is made by walking." I think that's a great image for a pilgrimage. But the way starts from a starting place, and mine was Los Angeles. So, this is really digging into my skull. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Just watch that for me. So much better. Okay. So the first part of anybody's identity is family. And if one is lucky enough to have one, your life will be shaped by it. So mine was shaped by being an identical twin. If you know identical twins, you know it's a constant push-pull between being one and not one. So half the time you love fooling people about which one you are, and other times you just wish people would stop calling you twin because they have no idea which one you are. So when I came to Eastern, and my sister went to Vanderbilt in Nashville, was the first time we were really separated for a long period of time. Now, I cannot speak for all twins, but I know for certainty that if I ever walked into a room and saw something, I would know exactly how she'd respond to it. I could pick clothing that not only would fit perfectly, but that she would like, and she could do the same for me. We thought nothing of this. We thought all sisters had this ability. But this closeness with a twin protected me from ever feeling lonely or alone. I have never felt lonely or alone. Never. I still don't. And she's been gone since 2018. This is a great gift. To feel alone is to feel vulnerable on a very personal level. It is to doubt yourself. And I think of some of the places I have gone just this weekend in New York City. Interesting place. Some very rough neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And a very interesting alley in Beijing, China, which I can't believe I walked down. A catamaran I sailed across Mission Bay. Ever been to San Diego's Mission Bay? Well, it's full of people. It's very dangerous to sail anything across it, let alone a two-pontoon catamaran that you've never sailed before. I credit being a twin to getting through that. But it's an absolute certainty that even if she could, that twin is never going to leave your side. Never. She's always there. But we weren't just twins. We had parents, too. Yes, we did. And they were fairly extraordinary parents. Our father, who was born in Los Angeles, was the son of a Greek immigrant and a Scots, English, Irish mother. So you can see right there some interesting things. Now, his father changed his name and legally took his wife's name, Caldwell, giving up, surrendering his beautiful multi-syllabic Greek name, which was Papa Georgiopoulos, his Greek Orthodox religion, and most of his friends, to support his family by selling produce at Central Market in downtown LA. That's how that family got through the Depression. There's a theme here, though. In high school, our father drove produce trucks for his father all across LA, which in those days was called scabbing, not a particular safe occupation for a young boy in unionized LA, but he did that. In 1938, our father climbed on a train and took the train to Louisville, Kentucky from California and entered medical school at the University of Louisville with a crate of oranges and no money, no tuition money, zip, nada. Walked into the dean's office and said, I have no money. And they said, we'll get you a job at St. Mary's and Elizabeth's right down the street. And he worked in a hospital, whatever they did, like bedpans. I have no idea. He worked his way through the first year of medical school, and then the second, and then the Navy came on the scene and enlisted everyone in his medical class. Everyone. Paid tuition, gave them a stipend, gave them clothing, gave them a uniform, same thing. And basically saved his life, because you can't really go to medical school and work, 7 to 11s or 11 to 7s. You just can't do that. You would crack up. Anyway, the University of Louisville found him that job, and he repaid them years later with a scholarship for students just like himself, and an undying affection and loyalty to that institution and to higher education in general. After the Navy and after World War II, he returned to finish his medical residency in LA, and with his best friend from grammar school, started double dating actresses at Warner Brothers. LA, Warner Brothers was, well, they're out now in Studio City, but they used to be right in Hollywood. Well, one of those actresses was our mother. Our mother-to-be, not yet our mother. I mean, it was the 50s, let's get real. So our mother had a background in vaudeville. Her father lost his job when banks closed during the Depression. And she and her 2 older sisters became a vaudeville act, the dancing and singing Brodell Sisters. And they worked the circuit from Detroit through Canada to New York, which that route ended at the Cotton Club, which, if you know, the Cotton Club is still there, it's in Harlem. So it was a famous club, and they tap danced with, you know, these incredible African-American dancers and singers, and of course, great jazz bands and everything. So she really always remembered the Cotton Club. Anyway, the family, because all of the studios went to New York to scout talent, so the entire family was picked up and relocated to California so they could put the 3 sisters under contract. Her 2 older sisters went under contract first, and then Warner Brothers reached into the 9th grade, where our mother was, you know, a freshman in high school, and snatched her up and put her under contract too. So this sounds very easy, but it is easier when your older sister and your second older sister are both under contract, and then they say, anybody else with red hair in that family? Red hair photographs very well, by the way. Might want to notice that. Snatched her up out of high school, where she was doing a big role in the Mikado, and said, oh no, come to Borders, and you know, we'll put you in something a little bigger. So she did High Sierra with Humphrey Bogart. I know you don't know these names, but you might know Humphrey Bogart. She did Sergeant York with Gary Cooper. You might remember Gary Cooper. He called her Miss Gracie, and she called him Ielvin, with her best Tennessee accent, because they were supposed to be from Tennessee. And then she did Yankee Doodle Dandy with James Cagney. She was a fabulous dancer, and of course she danced all the way through that. Oh, and she earned her GED. That was the last her mother saw of the educational experience. And she was happy. They built a little schoolhouse and burnt it on the set. They were so glad she got her GED. No more time off for school. Anyway, why did our mother get those roles? Well, I think it was because she was fearless. They said, can you do a Tennessee accent? And she said, of course. They said, can you dance? Well, of course she could dance. She'd been dancing and singing on vaudeville since she was 6. They said, can you play the piano? Of course she could play the piano. She played the accordion. Close enough. She did play the piano in Yankee Doodle Dandy. It was a domed piano, but she actually played all the chords. Oh. And sang. And they used her voice. Very good. Anyway, so the parents-to-be, these children of the Depression, married and found an apartment. Well, they had children, us. And then they found an apartment in Los Feliz in an area called Pill Hill, because it was so close to hospitals. And our mother sued Warner's to break her contract and put a down payment on a house in 5 years. Our mother put the down payment on the house. So from our parents, we learned hard work and a deep appreciation for education and reading. Our father read 2 newspapers every day. You know, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, you know, the way people used to. I don't recall ever having money. We also inherited a fear of not having money. We never had any money until we were in high school, but we learned to write checks for our grandmother, including forging her name. I confess this. We forged her name. And we did all her bill paying, and that is a tremendous asset to anybody growing up. Find a grandmother, do her banking for her. So our mother had attended Immaculate Heart High School for 1 year, the 9th grade, Mikado, previously mentioned. She wanted us to go there, so we did. All-girls school. Very important experience for me. So we did, then we went to USC, and then graduate work at UCLA. Together, of course. But we did our doctorates in completely different fields. Medieval, Renaissance literature, Victorian literature. 400. So high school and college are critical areas for anyone's pilgrimage, and certainly for shaping character. So I want to tell you my favorite classes in high school. You should always tell people this, it's important. It really is. Latin, and French. Those were my favorites, not in college, but they were in high school. And speech. We had a wonderful, the speech teacher was the drama teacher. She showed us how to do this. She showed us how to do that. So she said, girls, pick up that microphone and talk into it. Do poetry. Memorize that speech. I mean, we did all of these things and we thought, why are we doing all this? We're in 9th grade. And she's getting us ready for speech tournaments and for speaking in public. Best experience ever, in my opinion. Of course, she was a great experience. But if you feel comfortable picking up a microphone and not spitting into it, but talking into it, that is a great gift to have when you're in 9th grade. Okay, but my favorite class was biology because of the midterm, which was one essay question. Explain the beginning of life on Earth, the Big Bang, and DNA. That was the midterm. Now you have to just love someone that believes you can answer a midterm exam like that. Now the twisted molecules, DNA, I mean, get it out. It was wonderful. We loved that. We loved that class. I love that class. Okay, the first homework I did in high school was math, because you know there was an end to it. You solved it, you were done with it. Boy, you know, essays, they go on forever. But so I love that. I love math for that. Anyway, when we were accepted into college, where we applied, we were stunned. But we went to SC because they discounted tuition for the second kid who went. And so twins, so, you know, the second one went half price. So I thought it was a great deal. So the college pilgrimage, I think, was a lot of fun. Now I should just tell you a little about USC. I know you know Trojans and all that. But at that time, USC had only 8,000 undergraduates. 8,000 by California standards is like tiny. It felt as though you knew everybody there. But what was most significant about them is they prided themselves on good teaching. And I believe it showed in every class, certainly every class I took. I probably learned more about good teaching right there than anywhere else, certainly in any classes that I took in teaching. But one of the most important classes that I took and learned this from, I shouldn't have been in at all. Because I was a poli-sci major, I don't understand it either. But anyway, there I was. And I was converted my second semester to be an English major by Mr. Charles Doyle, a citizen of the sovereign state of Texas. Mr. Doyle was an adjustment. His accent was a huge adjustment. But at some point after midterms, he's rolling along. We're all over the place. The freshmen in there, seniors, looking smug. So we're discussing Milton's Paradise Lost when Mr. Doyle delivered one of his signature questions. Curled hair. Where have we seen that before? Dramatic pause while we all look mystified. What is he talking about? Then he said, Locke's cruella. Well, Locke's cruella, for those of you not in the immediate know, is Middle English for curled hair. And he was pushing us back to the Middle English segment of the course, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the squire and the nun's priest's tale, who had curled hair. And in that instance, it meant vanity. And when Milton used it, it meant vanity. So he was making a connection between these two characters. So the seniors, who were fearless and desperate to get the class because they needed to graduate, said, Mr. Doyle, do you mean way back at the beginning of the course? And he said, what do you mean way back? And what does that matter? You must remember everything. Great advice. So it's a secret to education, you know, to see connections between and across what we know and don't know. It's a key to learning from the sum of those experiences. So I have tried, Mr. Doyle. I have tried to remember everything. So another class that shaped my, I think, long-term affection for language, but also my respect for good teachers. That was a faculty member from Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, and particularly Philadelphia, have a distinctive dialect feature in the pronunciation of pin and pen, which is to say, they make no distinction between the two words. Yes, some of you are nodding. So, well, and why should they? I mean, what's the difference, really? So he would say, yes, there's no difference. I mean, in dialect, but, you know, so I can make that now. Pin, pin. And he would say, pen. Say it again. So we'd say pen and pen. So, okay. Pin. Pin. He would try it several times and then he'd say, you see, dialectical differences. But what was extraordinary about that, and what I really learned from that, is that he shared that with us. He admitted that we could detect something that he couldn't detect, and he knew that. And he was willing, we could replicate a sound that he couldn't even hear the difference when he was not saying it. An extraordinary admission and a stunning learning experience for all of us. He also taught grammar. All right, I will not go into rhapsodies about grammar or diagramming, but I will say that for me, it was the key to understanding how literature works on the psyche. That infinite variety of language or linguistic expression, and that the immense possibility of unique, original syntactic expression. This is the fascination of literature, and it's what makes literature, that uniqueness, that enduring, striking, memorable expression that you cannot forget. So grammar and syntax and the study of the history of English language, it unlocks that for you, and it unlocked that understanding for me. And it meant knowing almost on a cellular level how language was working on you. I think that's really important. And it was that class, it was that teacher who could not make the distinction between pen and pen, but he could make all of this clear. So in graduate school, I fell in love with Victorian literature. I thought it was going to be the novels everybody knows, Victorian novels, huge, big, triple-deckers, Dickens, Eliot, Thackeray, everybody. But it wasn't just novels. It was the poetry of Arnold, Tennyson, Rossetti, Wilde, the prose of Carlyle, Darwin, Newman, Florence Nightingale, Ruskin, Herbert Spencer, all of these people. I could go on, but I won't. In the last year at UCLA, dissertation almost complete, Eastern enters the pilgrimage. So we were madly finishing up our dissertations. It's December. We have a job market called the Modern Times Association. Fortunately, that year it was in San Francisco, 8-10 hours up the road in dense fog, but you could drive it from LA, go to San Francisco. So we all went up there, and I had an interview with ENMU. It wasn't the only interview, but it was certainly the best. So the interview, at ENMU, they were seeking a new director freshman comp. Well, I was coordinating the GAs who were teaching freshman comp at UCLA, so I thought, hey, better try this, you know, we don't know how many of these interviews you're going to have. And I had 2 graduate courses in composition and rhetoric, and 2 in history of the English language, but they didn't care about that. And I had the advantage of UCLA, which started the first remedial program in English in the United States for GIs after 1945, when they came back from the war and were going back to college on the GI Bill and hadn't written in, well, many of them had never really written. They had all this data from that period, and they had an experience, a well-honed program for doing this. So I could talk about this. So when the interviewers said, we need to add a remedial class, what can we do? I said, well, use the SAT and the ACT scores. We can use a sample essay. We can score it with a standardized rubric. We can score the essays holistically and identify those needing additional writing, instruction, and then we can verify placement with a first day test. And one of the interviewers said, writing field, how do you spell holistic? So, I felt accepted. I don't know why. But later that evening, the chair called and said, would you like to visit campus? Would I? Yes, I would. So I came to an on-campus interview. It was wonderful. Everyone was interested, engaged, lovely, charming. I accepted the job as soon as the dean called for $17,200.
Wow.
Yes, my friends, the best salary anyone at UCLA got in 1980. But that wasn't why I came. It was that we. That inclusion. Immediately they said, we. Now maybe, I thought later, oh, maybe they were talking about what could we do? But I was saying that, what could we do? And so that's what I heard, and that's what I felt. So I thought I would love teaching literature when I came to Eastern, but I love teaching freshman composition. The students, all of you, were funny, happy to be here, energized, loud, very unlike laid-back California. Kind of like, read the soles of my shoes. I am laid back, you know, that. Eastern students were just, they were so polite. They opened doors. They called you doctor. You know, we thought this was a joke. I mean, we didn't even call our professors at UCLA doctor. We called them Mr. Well, they were all men, so what else would we call them? But that was, to me, astonishing that students could be like that, and they wanted to learn. And when you talked, they looked right at you, and listen, I just felt here, they care about learning. Here's where I want to teach. So my first teaching day, I'm sitting in my office, which was painted chartreuse green by the former office person. It was Dr. Mast, some of you may recall. So I'm sitting on a typing chair that wobbled at a desk with a manual typewriter. Riches! I was in, there was a phone. I mean, I thought I died and gone to heaven. This is so much better than UCLA, you can't imagine. But anyway, so standing in the door jam was Dr. Janet Frost. And she said, in very quick succession, because that was like her, she said, okay, welcome, how are you? Are you all right? You need anything? You want to be on a committee? I said, hi, Jan, hi. Sure, what's the committee? Stupid. I said yes before I knew. Well, it was women's studies. They were working on a minor in women's studies. Jan was the chair, and there she was. Well, that committee became my support network that I never thought was possible. These women were smart, encouraging, and they were building this program out of absolutely nothing. But it had the support of the dean, and he was a physical chemist, so I mean, if he was backing in. I should mention that there are two programs that have no respect at UCLA. One is women's studies, then, this is the 80s, 70s, 80s, and science fiction. And in one fell swoop, I was on a women's studies committee, and I was within days of meeting Jack Williamson and having him as a mentor, and then co-teacher and a lifelong friend. So just kicked over the traces of UCLA right there first. And I was very happy to do that. Anyway, Women's Studies Committee was a wonderful education in how a university works, because if you can get a minor through, you understand how a university works. I became chair 4 years later. That was a complete, again, serendipity. The person who was going to be chair got a Fulbright to Poland. I'm in Los Angeles. I get this call saying, okay, we're putting you up. This is 2 women in the department saying, okay, we're putting you up to be chair of the department. So I'm like, I can't be chair of the department. Frank's going to be chair of the department. They're like, no, Frank's in Poland. Oh, okay, I can do it for a year. Okay, well, 4 years later, I've been chair for 4 years. The dean took a job as provost at Murfreesboro. I always like to emphasize that initial so it gets in there, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He brought in all the chairs and said, well, who can be interim dean? So that time, CLAS had some of the most senior people on campus. I mean, senior. And they were chairs. And I know you don't know them, but they were all friends. They're still friends. Thurman Elder, Andy Say, some of you know. Tony Schroeder, Phil Shelley, Glenn McCoy. So Dr. Hyman brought me in and says, well, who do you think of the interim dean? And I said, well, Andy, Tony, Phil, Glenn. Okay, Glenn's in religion. Okay, Thurman, all experienced, senior, great teachers, smart. And the dean said, what about you? So I was named interim. I had no idea how. No idea. I planned, of course, never to apply for the position. But the Women's Studies Committee, unbeknownst, had the plans of their own. And they said, we've got your back. Might as well just apply. What difference does it make? Apply. Well, so I did apply. And I was selected. It was a national search. Again, I don't know how that happened. But then I got into the deanship, and it was the surprise of my life. All those chairs backed me. They supported me. So I'd go and say, another opportunity to serve. I said, like, you always say that. What do you need? I need this, I need that. I said, like, just tell us what you need. And they did it. They were the best group of supporters. All men, supporting the only woman chair. I couldn't believe my good fortune. Now I want to talk about 3 mentors, happened to be presidents. So Dr. Bob Matheny was president when I became dean. I went down to his office. It just struck me this morning that he was sitting at the desk that I'm sitting at now. And he looked up, capping his Mont Blanc pen. So like, how are the interviews going? I said, like, so I said, gave him a quick summary. He said, good, let's go to lunch. No interview, just go to lunch. So I said, like, oh, yes, sir. So we went out, he drove. And I thought, well, this is kind of strange. I cannot recall anything about that lunch except Bob Matheny talking about his love of Easter. Its students, its faculty, its staff, how it changed his life, how it turned him from a little kid from Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, into what he felt was a successful human being. And I thought, I will follow this man into fire. These are the people you follow into fire, who have that kind of passion and commitment about this institution. Bob Matheny. So Dr. Everett Frost, this is, of course, the spouse of Dr. Jan Frost. It took me several months to make that commitment. Because I didn't think that spouses were, with the husband. I didn't think that happened. Well, it happened at Eastern. So Dr. Frost was vice president for planning and analysis, became president in 1991. Dr. Frost was a true academic, cultural anthropologist. He famously gave a back-to-school speech on the Fijian cargo cults. See me after, I can tell you all about it. But I told him, I thought that was just brilliant. And he said, I don't remember doing that. I said, the planes landing in the bush, and you don't remember that? And they said, oh, did I say that? Yes, it was wonderful. And he said, okay. So you do remember the 4 E's. He had this other thing that he thought was really important. You're like, 4 E's, experience. And I don't remember the 4 E's. I remember Fijian cargo cults. Why? Because he was a great teacher. A wonderful teacher, and he was passionate about it. He started the Ruidoso campus, and he got us the Pew Award for leadership in undergraduate education, which he allowed me to conduct, which got me out of the dean's office and into grants, which is another story in and of itself. Smartest thing Dr. Frost ever said to me when I said, I'm not doing enough. And he said, now, listen, we must never be too busy that we cannot stop and think. The most important thing you do is leave time to think beyond where we are. Look at the national data. Look at the Chronicle. How does Eastern fit into that? Think. People need to have time to think. Best advice ever. I don't think I've heard better, and it's still true. I still try to think widely and creatively every day, because that's what he was saying to do. Also taught me how to administer grants. Next phase of my career at Eastern. When I moved into planning analysis, I got to work with Amy Holt. Amy started here as a secretary, and she rose to be the director of institutional research. Smartest woman I'd ever worked with, and the kindest, and the funniest. And then she would say, like, here are the numbers. I said, like, Amy, we can't just give people numbers. We have to put language with it. She said, no, can't do language. You do language. We had a great partnership. Amy did the numbers, and I did the language. And I think we both learned a lot from that, because she taught me how to read numbers. And then, well, I tried to teach her a few things about grammar, but anyway, we had a great partnership, and I think partnerships have always been a kind of terrific advantage I've had working here. With everybody, I've found partnerships, and I think that is a huge asset for us. The third, and certainly not the last, but the next mentor I really need to mention is Dr. Gamble, because when he came in 2001, almost immediately we had big blow up in faculty senate, and people were saying, oh gosh, people are getting so passionate. And Dr. Gamble said, passion is never a liability. It's an asset. It may be an impediment, but it's always an asset. And he was saying that when staff and faculty and students are passionate about a program or an idea, that's never a liability. That's your asset. That's what Eastern is. And I think that was great advice, and I still believe passion is an asset. Okay, so the final set of mentors that I want to recall who still support and sustain me are students and colleagues. Let me talk about students first. The greatest joy that any teacher ever experiences is when students move into a role where they're really colleagues. This happens with many more students than you might think, because they're not going to be teaching you. They're going to be entering their own careers, but then they're going to be your peer, meeting you eye to eye, brain to brain, truth to truth. And most of all, they're going to exemplify that wonderful phrase from the Nicene Creed, lumen de lumina, which is light from light. You know, there's a reason that many educational institutions feature lamps and torches and flames and, you know, all of those kind of interesting, weird symbols as a symbol of knowledge. Yale's motto is Lux et Veritas, light and true. Probably the only thing I remember about the UCLA, or the University of California system is their motto, which is Fiat Lux, let there be light. So light is really at the center of how we impart knowledge in higher education. It's knowledge that shares light, that ignites knowledge. That is what education really needs to be. And that's what students remind me of every day. And last and not least, there's an army of support that I am honored to credit, and that's the women of Eastern. My first couple of years at Eastern, I enrolled in several classes with Janet Frost in cultural anthropology and with Nancy Ward. And she taught Ovid and Plato and Spencer's Fairy Queen. I mean, I read Spencer's Fairy Queen, but not really that well. I mean, I was destined for the 19th century, not the 15th or the 16th. Anyway, I was surrounded by her students who called themselves warheads. Nancy warheads. And we had these wonderful conversations. She was a great teacher. I learned so much from her. And then from Jan Frost, Cultural Anthropology, I actually published a paper from her class on a remote tribal group in North Africa that you don't need to know. But the men veil. The men veil, the women do not. Fascinating cultural anomaly in North Africa. Anyway, I sat in on classes with Dr. Anne Louise Keating where, and I'm not kidding, she never made a declarative sentence. She only asked questions. It's the most extraordinary teaching experience I've ever witnessed. They all had strategies that I learned from personally and as a teacher. And then I had all these incredible staff members that I worked with. Elaine Bridwell, who taught me how to be a department chair. Joanne Hayes, who said to me when I walked into school the first day it snowed, she says, "Hon, you've got to buy some boots." Joanne, I don't have any boots. I only have my sandals. And she said, "Hon, you've got to buy a coat and boots." Later, Joanne would teach me how to be a dean because she knew how to run the college. And there I was, the dean, and she taught me how. And then I had Deborah Bentley and Karen Van Ritten as partners in the next stage of those jobs. And I do see them as partnerships because it takes every bit of knowledge that you have. Yeah, Chris is grinning too because she was in this party as well. And Chris Watson, and you remember, it's a family that runs a college or a department or a unit. You need that support, and you need someone constantly to bounce ideas off of. And that's what Eastern always provides with its staff. And I am so grateful for that backup, that family support that we always have. I just can't, I can't name everybody, but I will mention Joanne Gibson, Betty Johnson, and Caroline in Student Affairs. They were absolutely so committed, so utterly committed to students. Carol Fletcher and Ruth Moore in the business office. Ruth Moore, the first woman vice president in business. And Carol, her work study student, who then became comptroller. Minnie Navarro, Darla McCoy, and Doncella Kaywood in advising. All of these people love students, and all of them were solutions people. You went to them with a problem. I went to Minnie and said, "Minnie, I forgot this English major. She needs 2 years of foreign language." And Minnie said, "Wait, don't panic, don't panic. Teacher education, okay, we'll flip her to a BS, we're fine." She had a solution. That was Minnie. You went there with a horrible problem. You thought you were going to be fired right off that campus. And she says, "No, got a solution. She'll do this. I'll talk to her." So, I mean, they were solutions people. I treasure friendships, and so many of you are in here. Like Deanna, who's one who does her job so well. I am in awe of it. So many of you here. So, I could give you a litany, and I would surely forget far too many people. And there are men there too. But I just want to emphasize that the road to for this ENMU President has been rewarding, educational, enlightening, and amazing. The last group of people I want to mention is at one point on this campus there were 4 women deans. One was Renee Neely, one was Julia Rosa Emsley, one was Dee Martin, and I was the 4th. And the 5th was Dave Eisler, and we just bossed him around. Very good. He drove. He said, "Dave, will you drive so we can, you know?" I said, "You want to talk? I'll drive." So do that. He was a wonderful colleague. But those women were just incredible leaders, and I think of them every day. On my evaluations of Renee Neely, she's retired now, so I can tell you what I wrote in her evaluations. I wrote, "I would trust Renee Neely with my life." Of course I would trust her with the vice president. She was interim vice president. Of course I would trust her with academic affairs. And just these are the kinds of friendships you only get once in your lifetime. but I think you're more likely to have them if you work in higher education. I think you're far more likely to have that opportunity. So I wanted to mention those wonderful, wonderful women. I should also mention there were some pretty fantastic women regents too. At one point, you know, there are now 5 regents. Now we include a student. At one point, 4 of those 5 were women. And I don't know that the male drove them around, but boy, they were strong leaders. And they, you know, they would like come up to me and say like, oh, well, what do you think about this? And I would think like, these are regents, I'm not going to answer this question. Oh, well, Regent Fales, oh, Bridget Johnson. Well, that's wonderful, sure, whatever. But they were so inclusive. They were just extraordinary. And they found the women in the audience, because at that time I was a dean, and they would talk to us. It was absolutely fantastic. And then I have colleagues from the English department that they're still emailing saying like, when are we getting together? When are you coming to Indianapolis? I'm thinking like, oh, that sounds like fun. Anyway, I can tell you now that there are many, many rewarding experiences that are ahead for you too. And I just hope that it is the same journey and the same experience that I have had. Now you probably know the name Philippa Sue. She's in Hamilton. She plays Eliza. She was on the original Broadway play. And she was asked, so how did you go about, you know, entering your career? And she said, there's no map for you to follow to take your journey. She used the word journey, not career. You are Lewis and Clark. You are the map maker. I thought that was a wonderful quotation. And a great book for LaGray, who said earlier, 12th century, 9 centuries earlier, there is no road. The road is made by walking. These 2 completely different people who see the same reality about making your road and then, you know, understanding it, following it, and bringing others on it with you. So I want to conclude by wishing you Godspeed on your own journeys. I wish you challenges, not to make you crazy or sick or unwell or wanting to leave. I wish you challenges to expand your potential and the friends and colleagues to sustain you on that road. And I wish that when your pilgrimage is almost over, that you have the same energy and optimism and humility that you had when it began. And the same sense of gratitude and joy in that journey that I have today. Thank you.